It has been a month. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you so much for joining me again. Today, I have my wrap-up of all the books I've read in July, and also it's my 1-month anniversary on BookTube, so I wanted to reflect a little bit about what my experiences have been and what I hope to do better going forward with this channel. First, let's get through the books. It has been a busy month, and when I looked over the titles I read, I was surprised to find that I had actually completed 15 titles this month. Then looking through them, 3 of them are short story collections or anthologies. 3 of them are novellas, and then another one is a novella and short story collection combined. So that's 7 out of the 15. And so I had 1 nonfiction title and 7 novels on top of those. So it wasn't as productive as a reading month as last month, for instance, but it was still quite a few titles. So let's go through all those and see how they go. Let's do the short story collections first, because I don't have quite as much to say about them. The first one is called Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction anthology, edited by Shane Hawk. And as you can guess, this is a collection of mostly horror, but other dark fiction that is all written by Indigenous and Native authors, some of whom this is their first time being published, others are well-established authors. And this was phenomenal. I really enjoyed almost every single story in this collection. There was one near the end that dealt with sexual assault in a way that I felt was very cringy and maybe a little outdated. But the rest of them, I really enjoyed. Labeling them all dark fiction was quite appropriate. They weren't all horror, but they all were either horror or horror adjacent. And some of them, were reflecting the Indigenous experience. Some of them were dealing with Indigenous folklore or mythology, and others were just dealing with everyday kind of horrors that are part of American life that they happen to experience as an Indigenous person, even though that wasn't central to the plot. This collection has it all. I really, really enjoyed it. I can't recommend it enough. So Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction collection. And honestly, there's a number of authors that are contained in this collection that I look forward to seeing what else they write, because it was so much fun to read them in this collection. And then the next collection is called Spectrum, an autistic horror anthology. And this is edited by Aquino Loyatza. I'm not quite sure if I'm saying their name right, forgive me. And this also I thought was really, really wonderful. Similar to the other collection, all of the authors here are neurodivergent, yet not all the stories are about being neurodivergent. And as a result, you have this really wonderful push and pull in collection where some of the stories and the horror and the main driving thrust of the story has to do with being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. And in other stories, that just happens to be an aspect of the character that they're navigating while these other things are happening around them. And then other stories, the horror itself is from how neurotypical people treat and engage with neurodivergent people in the world. So within the collection, they don't all have the same kind of driving push. There's a really wonderful balance. And again, literally every story in this collection was fun. I had a good time with the whole collection. I can't recommend it enough. Spectrum, an autistic horror anthology. And then the last collection I read was not an anthology, but it's a short story collection. And this one is called No One Will Come Back for Us and Other Stories. And this is by the author Premi Mohammed. And she is a Canadian author. And previous to this, I had read her Beneath the Rising trilogy, which is like a dark sci-fi / eldritch horror trilogy, which I thought was phenomenal. And I'd also read The Siege of Burning Grass. And that one is more of like a socio-political exploration in a fantasy world, with a little bit of sci-fi mixed in. And so I've really enjoyed all of her long-form novels, and this collection of short stories also did not disappoint. These stories weren't written for this specific anthology. They were published in other anthologies, and she's collected them all and published them together. So this is the first time all of them are being published together. I think there's 20 some odd stories. One story is being published for the first time in this collection, but the rest of them were previously published elsewhere. And in the end of the book, she actually has like a paragraph or so on every story, not giving a summary of the story, but explaining what she was thinking when she wrote it, how she feels about it now, and just kind of some ideas that she was playing with it that she had hoped to explore, which I thought was really fun. It was like a little peek behind the curtain. But aside from that, the stories themselves were all really strong, and they show Muhammad's range. She clearly enjoys playing in the sandbox of like eldritch horror and the unknowable, and so you have a lot of that flavor in a lot of these stories. But you also have some sci-fi, you also have some political action and thriller stories. You have a lot of kind of near future dystopia stories. There is some folk horror. Actually, there's one folk horror story right in the middle of the collection that I thought was absolutely phenomenal. So she has this whole range of dark fiction that she writes, that ranges from cosmic horror and the unknowable to kind of political thriller and everything in between. And I really, really highly recommend this collection as well. So all three of these collections that I read this month, Never Whistle at Night, Spectrum, and No One Will Come to Save Us, I thought were all really, really strong short story collections. And that's not always the case. Then I did read one other collection, which was only 3 or 4 short stories and a novella combined. And that one is by Willow Heath, and it is called Managing Another Lies, a queer horror collection. Willow Heath, many of you may know as a person who reviews books on BookTube, but she is also a poet and an author and a professional editor. And this is her first published collection. So this is a novella along with a few short stories. And these I thought were a lot of fun. What she does is most of these stories aren't written in traditional narration. They're kind of epistolary. So the novella is written from a collection of journal entries. There's one story that is written as a number of like message board comments back and forth. There's one story that's written as if it were a play with director's notes written in the margins of the play. So they don't follow traditional narrative structures. And a lot of time for me, when I read a story like that, I have to find a reason for it to be written in that way to be extra compelling, because those forms don't always work well with me. So for instance, the novella, I enjoyed it quite a lot. I struggled to see why it had to be written as diary entries, you know? The one that was message board comments back and forth, that one I thought was really, really wonderful. And it was exploring the dangers, a little bit of parasocial relationships between creators and fans. So because of that structure, I struggled a little bit with these stories. Yet I had fun with every one of them. The novella especially was an exploration of what it means to live as a trans person in the world. And the analogy that it's used is a young woman signs on to take care of this old house. And she believes she's living alone in this house as the caretaker. Yet there seem to be other people maybe living in the house that she meets as she's there, but they sometimes ignore her. Sometimes they're hostile towards her. It's very unclear what's going on. No matter what she cleans or what she rearranges, it just gets dirty and messy again. And the story itself is an extended analogy of what it means to come into a trans identity and live with a trans identity in the world. What I liked about it is that the analogy isn't blunt, hit you over the head. It's not right in your face. Now, the woman in the story is a trans woman, but you don't even find that out in the beginning of the story. Just the way that the levels of meaning work in the story, I thought were really, really well layered, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And it's a very gothic feeling. Of course, anything with like an old house is going to give you this gothic feeling, but Heath really leans into it and does a really good job taking the setting and the theme and making them work well together in this kind of cryptic tale. Again, I wasn't sold on it needing to be in diary entries. There could be other reasons for that. But that aside, I still enjoyed the story. So that was a novella that took about half of her collection. And then the other short stories were all more traditional length for short stories. And all of them were fun. I thought they all were really well written. They were dark. You know, a lot of queer horror these days is quite dark and not nihilistic, but borderline that. And Willow Heath kind of plays in that arena as well, with little glimmers of hope and rage and, you know, queer ferocity mixed in to like the grossness of dark body horror that is often also associated with queer horror right now. So it's a really fun collection. I highly recommend it. It was just released this month, so you can go pick that up. I think it's self-published, so you can get it anywhere that you have Amazon available, either in print or in digital formats. So that is Managing and Other Lies, a queer horror collection by Willow Heath. So those are all of the collections I read. So now to the novellas and novels and the one nonfiction piece I read. So I'll go through these in order. The first title I finished is Private Rights by Julia Armfield. I actually received this as an ARC on NetGalley, and it's not being released in the US until December, but it was already released in the UK this month. And so I have an extended review of this on my channel, so I won't speak too long about it. But this is Julia Armfield's second novel. Her first one, Our Wives Under the Sea, I thought was phenomenal. That one was about a woman whose wife is like a deep sea explorer, and she comes back from a mission, but she has changed. And maybe the ocean has come back with her, and it has these vibes of the unknowable horror that associate with being in a relationship with someone. And this one follows similar themes in that it's all about relationship. It is inspired by King Lear, and it follows three sisters. And right at the beginning of the book, their father has died, and they're all estranged from their father and somewhat estranged from each other. And the story is about them navigating what their experience of their father dying means, especially because there's something in his will that is unexpected, and they have to navigate that. And their father was a famous architect, so all the eyes are on them at all times, and the sense of being watched is pretty prevalent to them. And so the story goes back and forth between these three perspectives, and it goes back to their memories of their childhood, which are fuzzy and hazy and not really clear, and the way each of them is trying to figure out who they are while they're constantly under pressure and under observation from a father who, by their own accounting, was somewhat monstrous, and by a world who looks at them with expectations based upon their father's fame. That alone would be enough for a compelling story. But what Julia Armfield does to elevate it is the setting takes place in some near future that has undergone some sort of climate apocalypse, because everything is underwater and it's constantly raining all the time. Everyone has moved up to the upper levels of the high rises, and the lower levels are all blocked off because there's too much water flooding the streets. And the wealthy are the ones that take up most space in the higher levels, or they've moved up the, up elevation into the hills and the mountains. And the impoverished are the ones that are struggling to find somewhere that isn't underwater to live. And so she takes this almost dystopian setting and puts the small apocalypse of these three sisters and what's happening to them and places it within a larger global apocalypse. And it asks you, what is more important, your own personal apocalypse or the apocalypse that you are living, the bigger one that you're living, a social apocalypse that you're part of? So it's a really, really wonderful book. The writing is lush and dense. The feeling of being like moist and wet and like underwater and not able to breathe is persistent the whole time. And she does a really great job of showing how these three different sisters are wildly different people and are navigating the same awful set of circumstances in wildly different ways. Overall, I thought the story was really wonderful. I have a longer review, so I won't say anything more about it here, but I definitely recommend it. The next thing I read was part of my Splatter Western ongoing project. So my project to read all of the novellas and novels and comics in the Splatter Western series that is being published by Death Heads Press. And so the first one I read this month is a novella, and it is called All of Your Dreams Will Come True When You're Dead by John Wayne Communell. And this I thought was a lot of fun as well. I have a longer review on my channel, so I won't go too long into it. But the premise is that our antagonist, who has come from another dimension, and he wants to cause his dark dimension, which is basically like a dimension of eldritch beings and cosmic horrors, to come to Earth and our two dimensions to collapse one on top of the other. And in order to do that, he's created this little pocket dimension, and he keeps culling souls from the nearby town. And when there are enough souls there, he's invited like an eldritch god to come. By tearing a hole through time and space, the weight of those souls will cause that hole to rip open between dimensions. And so these two dimensions will collapse onto each other. And that's his like overarching goal. And so that itself is an interesting plot within a Western, 19th century Western town, otherwise traditional Western setting. And then the story follows multiple points of view. So we follow this antagonist once in a while. We follow his apprentice, who is this mute young girl who has psychic powers. We follow these three outlaws who are his like enforcers. And then our kind of main protagonist, if you want to call him that, is essentially a gunslinger who has been kidnapped and is trying to get out of this pocket dimension he finds himself in. And then the gunslinger's son, who is trying to grow up without a father. These are the main players on the board, and that we follow each of them kind of sequentially throughout the story. Now, the one place I think the story didn't work too well for me, you would expect when you're following all these multiple points of view that they converge in the end to come together to make a whole that's bigger than the parts. But really what happens is all of them are like living examples of lives that are upended due to our antagonist's actions, yet they don't come together in the end. Some of those stories, if you didn't follow them at all, if we only followed the antagonist, the end result would be the same. So their stories are not central to the movement of the plot. They're peripheral, giving you color, showing you what is happening in this world. And that was fun. I would have liked them all to come together in some way, and they had the potential to. They all kept circling the same ideas, and the characters were circling one another. So for them to converge in some way, I thought would have been a little more exciting. And instead, they all kind of fizzled out except for the antagonist's main storyline. And so in that way, was hoping for a little more. Yeah, I still had fun with it. It was a quick novella. It was kind of brutal and bloody and fun and kind of just what I expect from these splatter westerns. So if you have read other splatter westerns, you like the cosmic, you like the idea of the interplay between cosmic and the western setting, then there's definitely something fun in this novella for you. Then the next title I completed this month was The Moorings of Mackerel Sky by MZ, or Emily Zach. I actually won this novel in a giveaway on GoodReads, and that is how I found it. And it's this really wonderful exploration of a small fishing village in Maine, in Northeast US. And this fishing village is known for having been founded by a ship captain who was searching for a mermaid. And so this town believes itself to be both blessed and cursed by mermaids. And so mermaid lore goes throughout the whole village, through the whole town, and that persists throughout the whole story. And so there's this magical realism element of the story. And the way the story goes is, from almost 2/3 of the story, you don't have a strong narration or a strong storyline. You're checking in with individual characters around the town, and you are learning their stories and the history of the town at the same time. But there isn't like they're all working together towards something. It's more of exploring the town itself as a character and using these individual lives in the town to show what this town is and how mermaids have or have not blessed and or cursed that town, and how the experience of the supernatural in the town affects the way the people live in the town. And then closer to the end, the storylines actually start coming together, and there's this narrative propulsion that goes for the last third of the book or so, where you see that you were building towards something, but it was just very slow in the start. And it took me a while to get into this book, I think because of that. I wanted more of a narrative in the beginning, but once I realized what it was doing, I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was a really tender exploration of the kind of intricate lives that people live in small towns. It felt very genuine to me, to what small town life is like, even though it has this fantastical element of mermaids and the supernatural mixed in. And there are a lot of just really wonderful characters who both felt genuine and they felt complete in the story, but they also felt like someone you'd know. So the 3 old widows who ran the library or are constantly sitting on their porch living together, knitting or crocheting, blankets and so forth. Or the 2 young boys in high school who were queer and in love with each other, but neither of which have come out yet and are afraid of coming out to their families for different reasons. Or the young boy whose mother is suffering from addiction, and so he's basically raising himself, and he gets in trouble right in the beginning and crashes a car and is trying to make amends for the harm that he's done in that way. And he finds like a surrogate mother figure to help him in that quest. So you have all of these little individual characters who on their own could be stereotypes or archetypes because they are the characters you see in any small town story. But MZ does a great job of making them all feel genuine and real. And so I really do recommend this story. It's very gentle, it's very tender. There are some exciting scenes, especially towards the end. There's some violence, especially towards the end. Overall, it is this really heartfelt exploration of this small town and what it means to be touched by mermaids. And so if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, I do recommend this book. I think it was a lot of fun. Then the next title I completed was Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. And this is Tingle's second full-length novel. And I had a great time with this. I have a longer review on the channel, so I'm not going to say too much, but I did not like it as much as Camp Damascus. And I think the reason for that is because I was really excited for another horror novel by Chuck Tingle. And I thought Camp Damascus had some really horrific elements and was genuinely scary in some points. And this, I don't think, is a horror novel. I think it is a really biting satire that is wearing a horror novel's clothing. You know what I mean? There are horrific elements, there's some scary elements, there's some slasher elements mixed in, but this isn't really a horror novel, I don't think. And so because of that, I was a little disappointed, simply because I was expecting a horror novel and because I enjoyed the existential threats of Camp Damascus as so much. However, with that said, this was a lot of fun. It is a satire that's really looking at the state of the entertainment industry today and asking what does it mean to be creating art versus creating content, I think is one of the underlying questions that pervades this story. And then there are other kind of consequences of contemporary entertainment culture that Tingle is exploring. And all of them, I think he does a good job on it. I think it's a little bit campy. I think there's good action. I think the main character is compelling. I think the secondary characters feel a little flat to me. They don't feel as interesting. They feel kind of like the quirky best friend and the stoic boyfriend. don't feel like especially well fleshed out. But the main character, who clearly is like a stand-in for Tingle himself, I think, has a lot of depth and gravitas, and what it means to be out in the world and your queerness being part of the art you create, and yet still closeted back home. To be LA out, but not Montana out, as it is in the story. And then to have to run away from your literal demons, as horrific monsters that he's created in the movies he's written have come to life to hunt him. So I think there is a lot to play with in this story, and it is a lot of fun. So if you're at all interested in horror adjacent queer satire, then Chuck Tingle has you covered with Bury Your Gaze. I definitely recommend it. But if you're expecting something really scary with the kind of existential horror that you had in Camp Damascus, then you're not gonna find it in this one. This one's a little more lighthearted in that regard. And then the next novel I finished this month was part of my Novel Life project. So I was inspired by Criminali to begin a project called My Novel Life, which is to read a different novel from every year, starting with the year of your birth. And the only real rules are that every novel has to be by a different author, so no repeat authors. And I think that's about it. And there's no time frame. I happen to read 2 this month that are part of this. The first one, so from 1984, which is the year I was born, I read The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks, and this had been on my TBR list anyway. My idea with the My Novel Life project is to kind of go through my TBR list as much as I can, as a good excuse to knock off a lot of books that have been sitting on there for a long time. And so this was the first one, and this is often included in lists of like most disturbing books. And I don't know that I found this especially disturbing. There are some quite disturbing scenes of violence against children and against animals. I guess it was unsettling is more what it was. And the writing itself does kind of slide back and forth between this dark humor and psychopathy, like really smoothly. And that is unsettling. And it asks some unsettling questions about gender roles and gender expectations. This is even in rural Scotland 40 years ago, is asking these questions, and what it means to be raised by yourself, what it means to be isolated from the world and isolated from yourself. Our main character lives on a small island, and he's raised by his father, but he has very little contact outside of 1 or 2 friends that he goes to the pub with in the evening, and he doesn't go to school, and he builds his own world in his mind that he is part of. Meanwhile, his brother was committed to an insane asylum, and you find out, I mean, right from the jacket copy of the book, that before the story of the book, he's already killed 3 people. 3 of his family members he killed while he was younger. I think the first one he killed when he was 6 or 7 years old. So he himself is a psychopath, but he doesn't view it that way. Being by himself so much, he's created his own understanding of the world and what it means to have balance in the world, and he's living according to these like rites and rituals and understanding that he has created for himself due to his lack of experience in the world and his lack of loving relationships outside of himself. And it's a kind of a dark exploration of what it means to not have any genuine nurture in your life. So it was unsettling. I think it was a compelling read. I'm really glad I read it. I don't know if I'd put it on the list of most disturbing books, but it definitely gave me a lot to think about. So that's The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. And then the next title I finished is a nonfiction book, and this is called Queer as Folklore, The Hidden Queer History of Myths and Monsters by Sasha Coward. And I actually received a copy of this from NetGalley in exchange for a review, and this is being published later in the month, so a longer review will be coming out then. So I won't go into detail here, except to say that it is exactly what it sounds like in the title. Sasha Coward is a historian, and he goes back thousands of years to look at all different mythological and fantastical creatures and to see how the depiction and exploration of these fantastical creatures is related to the understanding of queer life at the time, and queer individuals and queer identity, and what it means for the fantastical and the magical and the monstrous to somehow be representative of those identities that are considered marginalized or dissident in everyday quote unquote normal society. It's a really interesting book. I thought the history research aspect of it was really fun. It doesn't read like a history book. It's not dry. It's not dull. You don't feel like you're in a stuffy lecture hall. So the history itself still has the author's voice coming through, and it's really compelling research. I really enjoyed it. Some of the contemporary analysis and the way he's relating mythological figures to contemporary examples in everyday queer life in the 21st century feels anecdotal to me and a little thin. So I didn't love that aspect, but I thought the historical research was really interesting, and I did like the bridges he was drawing between ancient archetypes and contemporary life. So I enjoyed it overall. I thought some parts of it were a little thin, but the research itself stood out as being really great, and it makes it worth the read in and of itself. And so, like I said, I'll have a longer review coming out later in the month. The next book I read is called The Hangman's Belief by Christopher Harvard. This is a debut novel. And again, I have a longer review coming out. Now, when I got this from NetGalley, I believed it was being released on the end of the month, at the end of August. Yes, since then, the release date has been postponed to the end of October. So my review won't come out until closer to the release date. So I'll just give you a brief synopsis of it now, though, which is that this is a werewolf story, and it follows a young man known as the Hangman, or also Fleet, and he is part of a secret agency that hunts werewolves, essentially. And the book starts with him going on his first solo job, and he gets to this small town where there's been a murder, and he has to do kind of investigation work. So there's this mystery detective element to the beginning, and nothing in the town is the way it seems. No one's really giving him any help or any answers, and things kind of get out of control after that. And so I'll leave it there, except to say that you can tell it's a debut novel. Some of the writing is a little clunky, especially in the first 2 chapters or so. And there was even a scene in the first or second chapter that almost made me want to put the book down. It was so contrived. It was a scene where the author was introducing all of the characters, and the way he got them all together just felt really ham-fisted and didn't work for me at all. But once I got past that, I thought this book was actually really, really fun. I read it essentially in one sitting. The pacing was really strong. There were some really gory, bloody action scenes between numerous werewolves fighting each other, and they were really cinematic. You could see them in space. So I thought the writing actually became a lot stronger as the book progressed. Some of the characters felt a little thin. They could have used a little more depth, and some of the writing was a little clunky, but it didn't hold the story back. I thought the story itself was really exciting and fun. The lore, the depth, the interesting take on the werewolf mythos. So I do recommend this one. I had a lot of fun with it. It's clearly the first in what's going to be a series, so I'm looking to see where Christopher Harvard goes in the future with these books. My guess is that they're only going to get better, and his writing will only get stronger because there was so much potential in this one, and some aspects of it really, really shown really well, such as the action scenes and the plotting and so forth. The next novel I finished this month is called Please Fear Me by Jennifer Love, and this also I received an early copy of, and I have a full review coming up later in the month. And this is a story, also a debut novel, of a young girl, 16 years old, Smidge, who's run away from home. She comes from a broken home. Again, her mother is an addict in and out of recovery and rehab, and she and her best friend are essentially performance artists, and they fall in with a traveling circus, which may or may not have nefarious intentions, especially the ringleader of the circus. And at some point early in the story, our main character realizes that she needs to go home again, and she feels compelled to go home again. But Violet, the young girl she's with, wants to stay, and there's this constant push and pull. And really, the story is about despair in many ways, and you can even see that in the title, Please Fear Me, right? It has this ferocious dog barking on the cover, but that just is them shouting as a means to scare you away, to try to hold some of themselves in. This is a story about searching for yourself, searching for a way to find any sort of solid ground to stand on and not finding anything. I thought this was a heartbreaking story. It was really beautiful, really well written, and I have a longer review coming up later in the month, so look out for that. The next story I finished was another novella, and this is another one of my splatter western series, and this is called Human Shaped Fiends by Chandler Morrison. And so many of you may know Chandler Morrison. He made a name for himself with, I think, his debut novella called Dead Inside, which is about a janitor who works at a hospital who also happens to be a necrophiliac, and he falls in love with a doctor at that hospital who is a cannibal. And so he made a name for himself in this kind of extreme horror space. And so he wrote one of the splatter westerns, and this was great. This was so much better than it should have been, because the western itself is pretty standard. That there is a gang who is killing people in a town, and the sheriff has to try to stop them. And the sheriff is somewhat incompetent, so outside help comes, and there is a clash between the sheriff and the outside kind of bounty hunter, and then the gang. And that's what the story revolves around. Yet, in between every chapter, give or take, there are these meta chapters where Chandler Morrison himself is a character experiencing writer's block, trying to write this splatter western that he was contracted to write, but he doesn't have any clue how to write it. And so he's an exaggerated version of himself in the story, as well as some of his friends are as well, other authors who write in a similar vein of bizarro fiction or splatter fiction. So some of the names you might know, like Autumn Christian or Brian Assman, are characters in the story with him. And this meta aspect, it could be looked at almost like lampshading, poor writing. Like, I'm just going to tell you that I don't know how to write a western, and therefore this is what you're going to get. But really, I just thought it was really brilliantly done. And when you try to go meta like this, very explicitly so, it can just fall on its face. And maybe if this was longer than a novella, it would have, but it was the perfect length. And he had just enough level of exaggeration to the real world, quote unquote, real world aspect of it, the meta aspect, that everything I thought tied together really well. When I got to that first chapter, or the first like interstitial break where you brought in the meta aspects, I wasn't prepared for it. And it says it right on the jacket copy that there are two stories happening, the meta story and the western story. But I had forgotten about that when I started reading it. And even the cover itself, you can see on the cover, there's two covers essentially. The bottom half is a fictionalized version of Chandler Morrison himself, and the top half are the fiends that are the main antagonists of the western. But I had forgotten that, and when I got to that first chapter where he was complaining about having writer's block and not being able to write a western, and always being known for having a brand of extreme horror, so anything he writes has to have incest and violence and rape and murdered babies and cannibalism in it, because that's what his fans expect. So if he writes anything else, then they're going to be disappointed, and he has to do it for the brand. I thought was just really compelling. And he even name checks his other novellas that he's written and says both of them are better than Dead Inside, but no one knows about them because Dead Inside just kind of takes over everything. So I thought this was great. I might do a little bit of longer review later when I've read one or two more splatter westerns and combine them into a combined review. So I might say more about it then. But I highly recommend it. I thought it was hilarious. It is bloody and gory and violent, and there are some scenes that are over the top that will turn your stomach. So be ready for that. And a lot of the violence doesn't make any sense, and there isn't like a narrative purpose for it. It's just gratuitous for the sake of being gratuitous. But then that is the point, because it is this meta commentary on what extreme horror is in the 21st century. So it's not for everyone, but I had a great time with it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And then the last full-length novel I read of the month was Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which seems like a wild departure compared to Human-Shaped Fiends. But the reason I read it is, one, it is part of the My Novel Life project I'm working on. So it's the novel from 1985 that I intended to read. I already set out for that project all the books I want to read for the 80s. And then when I finish those, I'll go through all the 90s and so forth. So I knew that I wanted to read it. I wasn't going to read it this month. I was going to wait. But it turns out that in Chandler Morrison's novella, one of the characters is taken directly from Blood Meridian. And what if this character left the events at the end of Blood Meridian and then went to this other town and did this thing? And so he's clearly playing on Blood Meridian. He doesn't mention it by name, but he mentions characters from Blood Meridian by name. And so it's clear that's what he's kind of playing with, and he's tweaking. So I thought, I have to read it now. I can't put it off. And it's clear why this is considered a great American novel. It took me a while to get into it. And anyone that's watched my reviews knows that I care about character a lot and interiority. And that's one of the most compelling things for me in a story, is being able to be inside of the characters. And McCarthy famously writes in a purely objective style that's sometimes called epic or biblical narrative prose, where he doesn't show you the interiority of the characters at all. He only shows you what's happening around them in very exquisite detail, but you don't ever get to be inside of the characters. And as a result of that, it was hard for me to get into the story. But what happens as a result of being purely observational is the characters start to become mirrors, and you start to see yourself in the characters, and you start to say, how would I react in these circumstances? And this is like a really nihilistic story. you know, as I read a lot of dark fiction, but in the end, this one left me almost more unsettled than other more egregious fiction that I've read, because the characters have so many opportunities to not be awful, basically. Every chance they get, they decide to define themselves by violence and by inhumanity, essentially. The story itself is this exploration of human nature and of what it means to be dancing with the devil, essentially. And how does human nature and a tendency towards violence or lawlessness pervade the human psyche? And how does that map on to this colonialist idea that we can just keep moving westward and own the land beneath us, regardless of who is there before us? There have been, doctoral dissertations written on this novel, so I don't think I will say anything else about it except that I really did enjoy it. It was deeply unsettling by the end, and it gives you so much to think about. And it did take me a while to get into it, but I knew that would happen. I knew that McCarthy's writing style is not one that is my preferred way of engaging in literature. And so I knew that coming in, yet by the time I was halfway or 2/3 of the way through, I didn't want to put it down because it drew me in so deep to the story. Blood Meridian, or The Evening of Redness in the West, by Cormac McCarthy. This is the second in my novel Life series for 1985. And I really, really enjoyed this novel. I'm really glad I read it. At first, I thought of it more like an obligation, but that quickly went away by the time I get into the story, because it really did compel me and bring me in deep. And then the last thing I read of the month was a novella. This is another story that I got from NetGalley in exchange for a review. And this is called Brood of Vipers by Joseph Fulkerson. And this is a little novella of religious horror. And I like the overall story. It follows two main characters. A preacher who, in the very opening chapter, he's in a car accident and his wife dies and he becomes paralyzed. And then the other main character we follow is someone who just was released from prison, and he is struggling with addiction, and he was in prison when his son was born, so he is struggling with feeling like an absentee father, and he wants to turn his life around to be there for his son. And so these are the two main characters we follow. It falls in the vein of religious horror, so an angel appears out of nowhere and offers things to different characters, and you see what happens as a result. And the story itself, it plays in a well-trod sandbox of looking at, the horrific violence of the God of the Old Testament and the zealotry of contemporary American Christian belief, especially right-wing Christian belief, and how that contemporary zealotry might mix with a God of the Old Testament, and what that kind of blind faith in retribution can bring forth. And so that's, not too new or exciting, but I thought the story itself plays with it in fun ways. And I thought the intervention of this angel, or this angelic figure, was interesting. So the overall story I enjoyed, but the writing I thought was just really, really clunky. It felt like he had a really clear outline of what he wanted to write about, but getting from point A to point B on the outline just happened. There was no transition. So it felt very step by step by step, if that makes sense. And so there just needed more finesse in connecting everything together. It was a novella. It was very short. I read it in one sitting in 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So it does pull you through. It keeps your attention. His pacing is really strong. He has a smart eye for pacing that you don't ever get bored. You're always on your toes. So I thought that was well done. But just connecting everything together in a smoother way, it felt very, very clunky. The dialogue also wasn't great. It felt very ham-fisted. And then the characters, those two main characters, felt a little bit archetypical, exactly what you'd expect to be, this broken preacher searching for meaning in the faith that he feels like has abandoned him, and the young man who is trying to turn his life around after having gone through hard experiences. They felt very much like a first draft of a character. So I did not love this one. If you like religious horror in general, religious horror is a thing that interests you, then you can have fun with this one. Like I said, it's really short. It's a novella. The pacing is really, really good. And so you can fly through it quite quickly. And there's fun here. There's fun to be had in this novella. It just, I think it needs a little more work, especially in the writing. And I think by improving the writing, that would improve not only the dialogue and the transitions, but it would also give the characters more depth. And by doing that, it would make it a much more welcoming read to me. So I didn't end the month on my favorite read of the month. But it is an author and a novella that shows a lot of promise and has some good ideas, and it takes interesting tropes and plays with them in fresh ways. So it wasn't boring and it was fun. It just wasn't my favorite. So it's an unfortunate way to end the month, my reading month. But there you go. Brood of Vipers by Joseph Fulkerson was the 15th title that I completed in the month of July. So it was a busy month. 15 titles, even though only 7 of them were novels, plus 1 nonfiction, and then a handful of collections and novellas. It was still a busy month. And part of the reason it was a busy month is because it was my first month of BookTube. And in the month of July, I released 19 videos, not counting this video, which is a lot. And it's a lot more than I plan on doing going forward. I've kind of fallen into a schedule of 2 videos a week is the plan, and maybe 1 or 2 extra throughout the month, especially if it's a heavy month. Like I'm looking at October, and I have a lot of advanced reader copies that are all being published in October, so that might be a heavy month. So there may be some exceptions, but the goal is for about 8 videos a month. Doing this many videos this month really took up a lot of my time, and especially because I'm still not great at making videos. When I'm on camera, I'm used to being on camera as a teacher, and so I go into teacher mode. But I don't want to be teaching anything in these videos. I want them to be conversations. I want them to be, more friendly than that. And so I'm still learning what it means to be in front of a camera in a more informal and relaxed way. Hopefully, if you're on this journey with me, you can see that my videos are becoming more relaxed, but they're not there yet. I still feel very tense whenever I make a video, and it feels like I'm lecturing at you, which is not what I want to be doing. So I'm trying to find the balance, and that's one thing I'm trying to improve. My video length, I'm also trying to improve. I ramble quite a bit, and I want my reviews, individual reviews, I think are good when they're around 10 minutes, maybe no more than 12 minutes. And most of them are getting to be around there. Some of them are still edging up 17, 18 minutes. So I'm trying to cut them down unless there's a good reason for them to be that long. And I'm not quite there yet, so I have to work on my rambling. I don't read off a script or anything. I do have some bullet points that I know I want to cover, and so I need to try to find a way to just make sure I can prepare for these videos in a more holistic way, that I can cover what I want to cover and talk about the things that are most exciting to me without kind of rambling on and on, and without feeling like I'm giving a book report. So I'm still trying to find that balance. As far as the rambles go, those are more fun for me, but I don't know what are the topics I want to talk about. So that is kind of up to you. If you have any topics you think would be interesting for me to think about or explore in the world of literature, or in the world of writing, or in the world of BookTube in general, or in the world of how engaging in art can be a meaningful way to develop yourself as a human being, which is something I care about, then let me know. I'm always open for it. I'd like to do more of those, but what the balance is going to be, I don't know. I don't have a lot of topics on mind right now. And, I am interested in book tags, so I might do more book tags as well, but I haven't seen any, at least this month, that really drew my attention. I do intend for this channel to be primarily reviews, but I want to have a balance of reviews and rambles. So I'd love your feedback on what other things would be interesting to you. What else? I'm still not great at not messing up when I record videos. That's why there's so much editing, you see. So that's something I'm working on. I think if I can get more relaxed in front of the camera, then there will be a less need for editing, which means the editing will go faster. But I know that I have spent days working on videos this month where I could have been reading. I definitely have at least 2 novels that were unread this month due to making videos instead. But that's okay. I don't mind. I'm excited about where I'm going with BookTube. Just seeing the little bit of feedback I've had so far has been really fun and exciting, and I look forward to growing, not necessarily growing my channel, that's not what I mean, but like growing myself as someone creating this kind of content, and hopefully I can continue to do so in a more streamlined way that it continues to be fun for me and fun for you. So as far as a 1-month anniversary goes, I think things are going well. I'm really excited. I'm having a good time still. I hope you are too. I think I will leave it there though. I don't have much else to say. Let me know what you would like to see from this channel, what things you think I could improve, what kind of things I could bring to the channel that would be interesting to you. If there's any particular style of review or a style of analysis that you think is exciting, let me know, and we'll see what I can do. We can grow this channel together. Other than that, I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.